Lesson 14, Relations Among the States. This is Chapter 4, Section 2 in our government textbook. Okay, so early conflicts between the states. We know about these conflicts. We've studied these conflicts between the states under the Articles of Confederation. We even know that two states had a little bit of a shooting match with each other because of disputes over borders in the West. Now, the solution to these conflicts that were going on between the states that was established with the Constitution was to strengthen the national government and set explicit rules in the Constitution. An example would be the extradition requirements. So if you have someone who is suspected of a crime and you want to try them in your state and they're off in some other state, you have that state, you say, hey, we want to extradite them, we want them over here so we can try them, and they're supposed to send them your way. So, how does this work? What are the interstate relations? In other words, what do states have to do for each other in order to resolve some of the conflict that earlier on states faced? Well, states have to give full faith and credit. And that means that, well, we'll get into that here in a little bit. We'll just go over this and then we'll hit slides that deal with it. So give full faith, states must give full faith and credit. They have to give privileges and immunities to citizens of other states. And they have to extradite criminals and fugitives to other states. So if you're writing this stuff down, remember that we're about to hit slides that go over this stuff, so you'll get to write it down. Full faith and credit clause. Each state must recognize civil laws and legal proceedings of other states. An example would be car registration. So, they drive into Texas from Oklahoma, and when they ask for your registration, you show it, and they don't go, well, you don't own that car because your registration is from Oklahoma, and we don't recognize that in Texas. That's not how it works. Also, contracts, which include marriage. Marriage is essentially a contract. So, if you sign a business contract with a guy in Oklahoma, and he tries to weasel out and move to New York to get away from you and try not to fulfill the contract, you can go after him. And New York will not try to shield him. Wills have to be recognized, and deeds have to be recognized from one state to the next. And this is basically it's good for business. Privileges and immunities. Privileges and immunities. A state cannot discriminate unnecessarily against citizens of another state. So if you're visiting a state, you can use the courts, you can make contracts, you can do business, you can even get married. Now there are reasonable limits to privileges and immunities. You don't get to vote in that state when you're not a resident of that state, a citizen of that state. You don't get to serve on juries there. If you decide to go to college in another state that you're not a citizen of, a resident of, you don't get to pay in-state tuition. And the idea behind that is there are taxes that are paying in that state to subsidize the education of the people who go to that public university. So therefore, at public universities, if you're not a citizen of the state or a resident of the state, therefore you haven't paid in, so you're not eligible for the subsidy. So you have to pay out-of-state tuition. There are residency requirements also for certain jobs in medicine and in the law, things like that. Extradition. This is another responsibility states have to each other. This is usually routine. Occasionally, there was a situation where sometimes it would come up that a governor of one state would refuse to extradite somebody. And an example in your book is given of a governor who didn't like the laws in another state, so he refused to extradite the person. Now, the extradition loophole is pretty much closed now. It has become a federal crime to flee to another state to avoid felony prosecution. So that kind of brings it into the hands of the federal government. And basically there's no way for a state, at least that I know of, to get around this. Now we move on to something else. This isn't really a requirement from states to one another. This is a power they have, Interstate Compact. These are agreements between a state and either other states, it could be one other state or several states, or it could be an agreement between the state and a foreign government, possibly more than one foreign government. The difference between an interstate compact and a treaty is that Congress has to approve the interstate compact. And frankly, Congress can pass laws that basically make the interstate compact go away. Also, the terms of the interstate compact are enforceable by the Supreme Court. So in a sense, these are state agreements, but they have to be policed by the federal government. Because when it comes to these kinds of treaties, if you will, these are not real treaties, these are interstate compacts, that is sovereign territory for the federal government. Examples of interstate compacts: states have signed interstate compacts concerning air and water pollution, compacts concerning pest control, because after all, when it comes to pollution and pests, these things don't just stay in one place. It's very easy for this stuff to move from one state to the next. And they've also passed transportation compacts. Now, states don't always get along. States can sue each other, and there have been plenty of lawsuits between states. Since 1789, there have been over 220. Lawsuits between states are heard by the Supreme Court. This is set in Article 3 of the Constitution. And examples: there have been disputes over water, use of water in Arizona and Colorado and California from the Colorado River. There have been boundary disputes. The example in your book talks about Arkansas and Tennessee. And there have been lawsuits concerning water pollution. In fact, Oklahoma sued Arkansas over water pollution issues in the Illinois River. Essentially, Arkansas's chicken plants were, according to Oklahoma, polluting the water. If you've driven by any, you'll know that's pretty believable. They kind of stink up the land around them quite a bit.